Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Young Guy International. Our mission here is still the same, driving a socially connected world by getting into deep conversations with inspiring people that shape our world. As you know, it is cultural entrepreneurship, but it's also experience that really ties all this together as we learn from our different guests. Today with me, I am happy to announce that I am with the mayor of the city of Kitchener, Mr. Berry Vrbanovic, and he's here to not only talk to us about his journey in politics, but what advice he has for us as young people. One, if you are interested in going into politics or entrepreneurship, or in the biggest sense, how you can be a global change maker, which is something that he has done, trailblazing so many different paths that we are going to discuss today as we get to know him. But as you know, as many of the different guests have done, we really like to get to know the guest first. But first, welcome, Mr. Mayor Berry, for being on the podcast, and thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Well, thanks a lot, Darren. It's a real pleasure, and you and I have had the opportunity to do some cool stuff together over the last while. So I was excited when I was invited to be a guest on this popular podcast.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate you for coming out. We have done a couple of great things together. Obviously, Mexico, which we're going to talk about with Bloomberg, and then most recently Spain with UCLG. But before I start my conversations with the different guests, I like to tap into their culture, their heritage. And it's usually just a phrase or two or a word that they usually give to me and to the audience to help us break the ice and start the conversation. I wanted to ask you whether there's something that you're willing to share with us today as we get into the conversation.
Sure. So, what a lot of people may not know is I actually wasn't born in Canada. I was born in what was then Yugoslavia, now Croatia. I came to Canada as a 2.5-year-old, and I'm obviously dobrodošli, which means welcome to your audience. But I think more importantly, you talked about sort of, are there any proverbs and so on, and so there's one that I always thought is a good one, and in Croatian it reads "Dobar prijatelj vredi više od lošeg brata," which the literal translation of that is "a good friend is worth more than a bad brother." And it's really, the message is, it's what matters in life is the people that you surround yourself with, and that can be family, that can be friends, but it's about surrounding yourself with good people that give off good vibes and help support you and encourage you on your journey in life, whether it's academia, whether it's your career, whether it's things that you get involved in the community. When we're surrounded by good people, we tend to strive to be more successful.
And that's a very powerful proverb. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem.
Can you repeat it again? It said a good brother. A good friend is better than a bad brother.
In essence. In English, yes. In English.
Essence, yeah.
But in Croatian, again, it's "Dobar prijatelj vredi više od lošeg brata."
I think it will take me a while to...
We'll get to practicing
We'll get my
that
practicing to that.
by next year's episode.
Next year's episode. As we get into the conversation, my first question really is getting to know you, but getting to know you as a politician. Now, yes, we will discuss many of the other aspects of your life, but as a politician, you have been serving sort of in Kitchener, I believe approximately 20 years now.
30 actually. 30 years. 20 as a counselor and 10 as mayor now.
What inspired you to initially get into politics?
So, Darren, it really goes back to grade school, actually. I started a school newspaper when I was in grade 7, took on the school board about an issue in grade 8 where we ended up getting parents signing a petition and took it to the school board. It was something, for those who grew up here, in their school boards, it might be called something called Scholastic Tab Book Services, and it was an opportunity to buy books at low cost. And the school board, for a number of reasons, decided to stop doing that. In my school, the teachers transferred it over to my name so that they couldn't get in trouble. I ran it, and then we convinced the board to reverse their decision, which still stands today. And then in high school, got involved in student government. Same thing in university. So once you kind of get the bug, it's hard to shake it. I worked on my first election campaign. I believe it was in 1981 1991, volunteering, and after that, it just kind of continued. Once I started my career at the city, I was there a number of years, and there was I knew that at some point in life I was going to enter politics, and really it boiled down to the right opportunity, the right time. There was nobody running in the ward that I lived in, nor the one that I was going to be moving into. And there were some things I thought could be done a little differently at the city. And I said, no better way to try doing it than running for office. And here we are 30 years later now.
Wow, that's powerful. And is there one particular experience, because I know you mentioned in grade school and then also volunteering in 1981, but is there one particular issue that you felt passionately drawn to, that you were like, the only best way for me to solve this or to address this is through politics?
So I would say, what ultimately got me to run at the city, one was the desire to preserve my old high school, which is actually across from City Hall. It's now actually Wilfrid Laurier University's School of Social Work campus in downtown Kitchener. But that was St. Jerome's High School for about 125 years. And I wanted the building preserved from a historical perspective. So that was one thing that was behind me running. And then the other one, quite frankly, was I was seeing some things in my own department that were a concern, but it was hard for employees back in those days to speak up and not potentially risk their careers and so on. And I was at a point in my life where I didn't have a mortgage yet. I didn't, wasn't married yet, none of those things. And so it was the right time to take that chance and make that leap. And I got elected, and here we are.
Obviously, politics has a certain stigma to it. But then beyond that, there's also this aspect of how politics actually does offer a platform for meaningful and this social change that essentially when you were getting into, that's what you hoped for. But for those who look at it as more of a thing of, it's a stigma, or, people really just get into it simply because it looks good, it sounds good, the pay is good, you're going to be shaking and rubbing hands with all these different people, and there's no actual change that happens. How do you sort of change that thinking for maybe a young person that is in this mindset of, do I really need to go into politics? Is that where real change happens? Or should I go into business? Is that where the real change happens?
So, you know what? I think that the right answer is actually a little bit of both. I think any of us can find avenues for being agents of change with whatever path we choose. Sometimes that path is through the business world. Sometimes it's through academia. Sometimes it is through politics. In my own particular case, it was politics, and it was really recognizing that there was, there's an opportunity to make a difference, to prove the point that actually, while there is some negativity that exists, less so than certainly than in other countries, it's also possible for politicians to do the right thing, to act with integrity, to be authentic, and to make a difference. And I would argue that by doing that and being down to earth and being a real person, 30 years later, I can look back and say, there's a variety of things that together with my colleagues on council, we've been able to achieve here. And then by being involved in things both nationally and internationally, I've had the opportunity to help, shape public policy in at both orders of government going forward.
I see. And now moving away from the sort of the foundational aspect of your politics, they're focusing on Kitchener now.
Yep.
As the mayor of Kitchener, you have been there now 10 years. What is one thing that you look at and you say, this has been one of my greatest achievements, not just as mayor, but with the team that I've walked these 10 years with in Kitchener?
Yeah. So, I would tell you that I think it's hard to narrow it down to one, but I'll try to do that. I reflect, for example, and I know we'll talk more about this later on, but on some of the work that we've done with our Make It Kitchener 2.0 economic development strategy. And it's a strategy that really has been built on work that we've done since the early 2000s in the city of Kitchener, recognizing that the world is changing around us. And if we want to really be looking at, in using a Canadian hockey analogy, where the puck is going, as opposed to sort of seeing it fly by us. We need to really create a vision and help direct where that puck will ultimately go. And so, ultimately on economic development, we said we wanted to focus on, with Make It Kitchener 2.0, on affordable housing, which we know is critical in terms of attracting and retaining employees. We wanted to continue focusing on small business and our support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we created the SDG Idea Factory, which, as you know, is an incubator for businesses that are working in the sustainability, social enterprise space, as well as businesses led by various equity-seeking groups. We focused on the health innovation arena together with University of Waterloo, which opened last year and is proving to be quite successful. And we're working towards a creative industries campus together with Conestoga College. So that certainly is one thing. But as I look back on my 30 years, including my council time, one of the things I value the most was actually a youth mentoring program that I started together with a police officer at the time at the community center in my ward. My old ward was an area that had a wide variety of people from a socioeconomic perspective living in it, and we knew we wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to be successful. And so we created this youth mentoring program that involved police officers, firefighters, EMS people, and community leaders. And that program ran for almost 25 years, actually 20 years, and up until the pandemic. And it was very successful and made a difference in the lives of those young people. We ran it every summer and was really all about teaching them leadership and community involvement and giving back where you can and those kinds of things. And I still run across young people that now, in some cases, some of them have families and so on already, and they introduce me to their kids, and they just talk about how important and influential a program like that was to them. So, it's hard, like, as I say, to really identify one initiative, because you have one that obviously makes a difference on a more significant scale community-wide, and then you also have another one that really has made a difference in the lives of specific individual people, and both in my mind are important.
That's true. You mentioned something. I like the analogy used of hockey and Canadian hockey and the puck, but then you said something about the vision of Make It Kitchener 2.0. Mm-hmm. What role do young people play in that vision, but also in making Kitchener that 2.0 strategy? And how would you advise young people to really get involved and galvanized with sort of the work? I know we're going to discuss sort of many of the other projects, but from that lens, what is the vision, and how can we as young people buy into that, get into it, and support?
Well, part of what we did when we were creating it, and this goes back to the work that we did with our original economic development strategy back in 2004, and it was recognizing that the world around us was changing, that the manufacturing economy that was and still is, but was a big part of the Kitchener scene, was changing, with some companies moving, to Mexico or over to Asia. And we needed to make sure that we were providing opportunities and attracting companies to the area that would ultimately be places where young people wanted to work. We had these three great post-secondary institutions in the community: University of Waterloo with its affiliated colleges, Wilfrid Laurier University, as well as Conestoga College. And so with all this talent coming to the community to study and learn, we want to make sure that, not only the kids that grew up here, but also those that were coming here had, great options and opportunities going forward, and didn't just come here to study and then leave. And so that was very much the thinking behind the original strategy, as well as the current one, and recognizing that, these are areas where young people have shown interest and where there is going to be opportunity for jobs and economic growth in the future. Health innovation is, with the aging population, is a big one, obviously. And we wanted to make sure that, we were investing to support that and support keeping young people in the community.
The reason I asked that is, of course, because of one of the biggest things, and how we got to sort of start speaking and engaging in this kind of work was the Bloomberg Youth Climate Action Fund, and how it has been pivotal in helping build relationships between municipalities, local leaders, and young people. How has something like that enabled more meaningful connections with young people, and what is your vision for how it can continue to grow and support a lot more, but also build those meaningful relationships between local governments and young people that are really at the forefront of sort of some of this work?
Yeah, so, I probably want to begin by just giving a shout out to Bloomberg Philanthropies and former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg for all of the work and the investment he's putting into building capacity in cities around the world. And so the way we actually got the opportunity to participate in this is each year Bloomberg picks 40 mayors from around the world to participate in their city leadership initiative. And that involves a mayor and 2 staff who go through a year-long program funded by Bloomberg in conjunction with Harvard University. And at the end of that program, they then start providing other opportunities for other staff and other things that they do for the city to apply and be engaged with. And so in our case, I had our CAO, Dan Chapman, as well as one of our general managers, Denise McGoldrick, go through the program with me. And it was for all three of us, it was a phenomenal learning opportunity and personal growth opportunity. But then that has provided a number of opportunities since then, and this has been one of them, to apply for the grants. And for us, it was important because it was an opportunity to take some of the stuff we were already doing as a city, like our Kitchener Youth Advisory Committee, who was engaged in a variety of things, but where we didn't necessarily have the resources to offer grants and so on in the way that this program has allowed us to do. And so, with the support of Bloomberg Philanthropies, we were able to do the grants that you and others were part of, with an initial contribution of $50,000 U.S. from them. And as you know, we're accepted into a second round and with $100,000 U.S. And we look forward to a variety of groups applying and making things happen in our community.
And it is very powerful because I've seen how many young people across the world have been involved in this kind of work, and how they have mentioned and said that it has really changed the way that they do things. Because I'm sure you know this, many young people have a plethora of ideas. We all want to try different things, but one of the biggest bottlenecks in the work that we do is funding.
Yeah.
Because yes, you have an idea, but to get it into reality, to get into that actualization, you need some resources, which has now been provided for by opportunities like this. The next question that I had was regarding sort of Kitchener's position in entrepreneurship in the Canadian ecosystem. When I first came to Canada, University of Waterloo, yes, the co-op system was a great sort of pull. But the more I got involved in, this ecosystem, Kitchener-Waterloo, I started to hear, Kitchener-Waterloo was dubbed Silicon Valley of Canada because of all the innovative ideas and the different things that were happening. And then recently, last year, like you mentioned, Velocity's Health Innovation Arena, a sort of another push, Communitech, for example. My question is, what is your vision for entrepreneurship, particularly in the Kitchener-Waterloo sort of region, and how can young people get into that, be involved a lot more? I know there are programs already existing through these initiatives, but your vision as mayor, sort of the leader of all this, what is that?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I think is true of everything in our community is the spirit of collaboration and cooperation. And, it's something that, quite frankly, you can pretty much go to any city and have mayors talk about how, that exists in their community. But I will say that I think in our community, and whether we're talking city of Kitchener or the broader region, it is unique. And the former president of University of Waterloo, David Johnson, who went on to be Governor General, often talked about the barn-raising spirit of Waterloo region. and that is a reference to the Mennonites who, lived in many of the rural communities that surround the three cities here in the region. And in those rural communities, when a barn would burn down, the community would come together, and in a matter of days, they'd rebuild the barn and go from there. And I think that spirit, that ethos, is something that really has ingrained in the community and happens, in terms of encouraging people to think innovatively, that encourages entrepreneurship, but also encourages people to work together and collaboratively, because ultimately, building that kind of startup ecosystem is not something that the city can do on its own. It's not something that the university can do on its own. It's not something that the business community can do on its own. For it to have the kind of success that we've had here, it's really been an incredible collaboration of the three orders of government, of the private sector, of academia, of the not-for-profit sector. And ultimately, it's created an environment that, at one point actually had us having, the largest number of startups per capita in the country. And those startups are important because ultimately those startups become scale-ups and so on. One, often refers to, and, your generation may not think about it as much anymore, but the BlackBerry, which originated in this region. And, we all reliably use our iPhones now. Back in the days, 20 plus years ago, it was the BlackBerry that was the first smartphone that was out there. And so really the goal has been trying to create an environment where other young people come up with the next ideas that ultimately maybe a few of them will become unicorns.
Who knows? But the question to you then is, why is it important? Because you have said, yes, we are, so this collaboration has made it possible. But to you, why is it important for you to support these young people with this kind of opportunities in the region?
Sure. So, I mean, it's important on a variety of fronts. I mean, one obviously is there's, a lot of adults who come here for their careers and their jobs, but this needs to be a great place to live, work, and play in, and to raise a family for those who choose to do that. And when they're thinking about, where can I raise a family, they obviously think about education, they think about healthcare, but they also think about, when my kid grows up and my child, gets their education, and if they stay here, will there be good job opportunities for them going forward? And so we want to make sure that as the community grows, there continues to be, good, viable, well-paying jobs. And so it's important for not only the adults that are there, but also for the young people, so that we're able to retain them in the community and provide exciting opportunities, so that, when you're finishing school and you're having to make choices, there's always going to be reasons to go to the large urban centers like Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver in Canada as an example, or internationally there's a lot of cool cities as well. But there's also really good reasons to stay here, and our goal is really to continue building on that, so that young people have good reasons to stay here and to be successful. And that ultimately helps grow that ecosystem here in the community.
That's true. And like you've said, collaboration is a key factor and sort of like the backbone towards this. Moving slightly away from that, collaboration, like you said, is big. But right now, like you said earlier in the conversation, the world is a very dynamic place right now, with lots happening right across the border as well. And I've heard you speak about this multiple times before. I also recently saw current president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Carol Saab, also speak about this, and how geopolitically right now it's making it a bit harder, one, for these meaningful collaborations cross border, but also it's what it's done is it's brought nations together. Like, I've seen how Canadians have really rallied together and said, you know what, if this is the situation across border, we're going to, come together regardless of the internal politics we have, and really stand up for our country. Recently, you were in Washington. You were telling me sort of some of the conversations you were having there. But Right now, when you see sort of this geopolitical issue that both countries are facing, what do you see as the future for this issue? But also, how do you suggest that in a meaningful way we get out of it as as Canadians? How do you get out of this?
So, listen, I think I'd be negligent if I didn't acknowledge that we're living in challenging times on a whole variety of fronts right now. And, I typically am a type of person that's positive, see the world as cup half full, cup maybe even 3/4 full. But I recognize that geopolitically right now, what we're seeing, happen is causing a lot of anxiety for people. When you take a country like Canada that is built, other than for our First Nations people, on immigrants and people who have moved to this country, those many of these situations are also impacting on people personally and their relationships with each other. So you think about the war between Ukraine and Russia and how that's evolving, including in the last week or two and even the last couple of days. You think about the tragic situation, between Israel and Gaza. You think about a number of the conflicts on the African continent, and now you add in this new administration in Washington, and things that I'll say maybe we even collectively took for granted in terms of that, relationship where we considered each other, between Canada and the United States, as each other's best friend, best neighbor, best ally. We have an administration that clearly sees the world in a different way, both in terms of that Canada-U.S. relationship, but also in terms of how they see their role, in NATO, in their relationships with traditional allies versus, what appears to be a new situation that's evolving with countries like Russia and so on. And that, for someone like me who's, family left the former Yugoslavia because of the influence of Russia back in those days and so on, is certainly a concern, in terms of where all this is leading. On the Canada-U.S. Situation, I couldn't agree with you more, with the notion that this really has, in many ways, brought Canadians together, like few things have in my lifetime, which has been a good thing to see. I think we sometimes haven't always appreciated, what we have here, how unique it is, how it does take work, but all of this has also been a reminder of how fragile it is and how fragile democracy is. I was encouraged by my time in Washington this week, and so we had a group of mayors from Ontario and Quebec who were there with a number of American mayors from the northern states that abut us, in that Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway corridor, and we were meeting with U.S. senators and U.S. members of Congress, and from both sides of the House, Republican and Democrat. And so on the encouraging side, I would say it was very clear to me that there was a high level of respect for Canada and Canadians and for that historical relationship. And we weren't, hearing the kind of language that, quite frankly, has been most unfortunate and unhelpful from the U.S. president, referring to our prime minister as a governor and talking about the 51st state and so on. I will also, though, say that, while that was the encouraging piece, and there was certainly broad recognition that having us, continuing that relationship and having a solid trade relationship between each other was key. There are some philosophical issues, particularly between, some Republicans and where Canada is at on these issues, and there's a lot of work that's going to need to be done, partially on educating people, and that's really a big reason of why we're down there. It's about making sure they have the information and the facts, the real information and facts, whether we're talking about trade, whether we're talking about fentanyl, whether we're talking about, border and immigration issues, and then hopefully them taking that and trying to advocate with their administration at the White House. It's become clear that our government isn't going to be able, they have a role to play in those negotiations, but ultimately the best source of influence will be other Americans influencing their government. And so we just need to make sure they're armed with the facts. And this is something that we did do back in 2003, 4, 5, when it was a little small, simple issue, which was the tariffs around softwood lumber, and made some inroads with that. This is much bigger, much more complex, with an administration that basically has thrown out all the conventional approaches to diplomacy and intergovernmental relations, and has brought a new approach to it that we're all learning to navigate through.
And sort of two questions surface from that. What do you hope is the future of this, like you said, sort of challenging issue? But two, what sort of advice, or not advice, but what would you leave with Canadians now to sort of give them that hope, that optimism that, hey, regardless of what's happening, there is still hope, there is still power and solidarity that we have as, Canadians in this region?
Yeah, so listen, I would say to you, first and foremost, there are a lot of people down there that value this relationship. They recognize that, we fought side by side in the trenches in World War I and II. We both lost, people from each other's families in those wars. We have people who recognize the value of trade and so on. The biggest enemy to all of us is, in some respects, misinformation, and sadly, social media is becoming a problem. But that's another topic, probably for another day. But I think we're recognizing that folks are starting to understand it. They're feeling it. They're hearing it from their constituents who are saying, like, this does not make sense to us, and are pushing back in their town halls with their senators and their representatives, in their communication with the White House. And ultimately, trade is critical. We know that having successful trade and not having blanket tariffs across the board is key for the success of both of our countries. As I reminded people when we were down in the States, some of the estimates that have been calculated is the average U.S. household will be impacted somewhere between $1,300 and $1,800 a year. The U.S. GDP will be impacted about 1.3%. That doesn't sound like a big number until you actually do the math and realize that 1.3% is actually over $440 billion. And when you recognize that a lot of that actually is along the border, between the provinces and the states along that border, it certainly wakes up a whole group of U.S. Politicians to some of those realities. I think when you ask, what's the message of hope for Canadians, I think, listen, as has been said, elbows up. We need to stay firm. We need to stay united as a country. We need to make sure we support each other, because there will be some tough times in certain sectors in particular. But we are also a people who time and time again have demonstrated our resilience, most recently during the pandemic, who have demonstrated when we put our minds together, when we stay unified and don't get caught up in party politics and so on, that we actually can move towards a vision and being successful towards our end goal. And ultimately, I believe we will get through this. I believe that the relationship between us is stronger than any one, or any few individuals on both sides of the border. But it is going to be difficult. It won't come without some pain.
And I do believe and hope that there will be sort of that reconciliation and ways forward in which this can be resolved in a meaningful way. We can't sort of leave our conversation today without talking about this particular issue, the issue of immigration. I myself am an international student, still, pursuing my degree at the University of Waterloo. Recently, we've heard so many changes within the government of Canada, and just how there is a notice and an understanding that, okay, we need to tighten some of our processes. We need to tighten some of the systems that we've had before. When you sit on your end, as a politician, what is your view on how, one, this insecurity around, meaningful and the right kind of immigration happening in Canada should be like? Because you did mention that sort of a lot of, or the backbone and sort of what has really helped build Canada is immigration and is
100%.
bringing people in. So right now, I'm sure there's lots of insecurity from people within, but also potential people coming in looking to study and looking to just create a new life for themselves. How do you, as a politician, as a mayor, sort of speak to this and sort of tell people that, hey, this is not something that is to draw you away from Canada, but really is something that we're putting in place to make this right and to also help Canadians first as well? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's something very near and dear to my heart because as you know, and as I said at the top of the podcast, I wasn't born in this country. I was born in what was then Yugoslavia, now Croatia, and came here as a 2.5-year-old. And even though that was early on in my life, and the majority of my life was here, no matter what, that history certainly shaped my early years and continues to shape my life going forward, because even in my role now as mayor, I've been working with the federal government on how to build ties between the country of my birth and the country that I'm a citizen of now, and including hosting the first female Croatian president in Kitchener when she became president back in 2016. It's interesting that I'm referencing that because today is also International Women's Day. So a shout out to all the amazing women in our lives who have helped us get to where we are. But as I reflect on that, it's unfortunate that I think two things are true. If I backtrack for a moment, number one, we saw a lot of growth happening post-COVID very quickly, and I'm not sure that it was always. I can tell you, it didn't happen in a way where the coordination could have been done as effectively as possible. So as we saw lots of people coming in here because we needed that for jobs and so on, we knew it was important for our education system as well. We didn't make sure at the federal level in particular, but also the provincial level, that all of the resources were in place in terms of housing, healthcare, all those kinds of things that when you have large influxes of new people, you need to make sure that that infrastructure is in place, both the physical and the social infrastructure. And I think as a result of that, different communities started feeling some levels of anguish around that. And unfortunately, in multi-party system, and where there are different views around immigration, that started playing out in Canada, in my view, in some ways that were unhealthy. And often that stemmed from opposition parties, but then the government started reacting to that. And as a result, I think it actually has done some damage that all of us need to work towards correcting. And I think people are starting to see that and recognize that. I think we're going to need to get past the upcoming federal election, whenever that happens, to do that. But I will say, this municipalities have had a really good relationship with the current federal government in terms of moving the municipal agenda forward. But this is an area where I've certainly expressed some displeasure, and I think it's not. It hasn't allowed us to continue building on the multicultural mosaic that Canada's been known for, and something that I still firmly believe in, and that we want to see pursue, because the reality is demographics say we need immigration to succeed, and the strength of this country, from my point of view, comes from taking the best of all of our cultures that we have brought to Canada, taking that spirit of innovation and of drive, because for people to immigrate, there's a certain amount of drive that goes with that, right? And so Canada has benefited from that, and Canada will benefit from that again. It still is, and will benefit, I think, even more from the future. We just need to, I think, do a little bit of a level set.
I have a question regarding that. Do you feel like with that, the more, these different diverse cultures come in, the more you dilute the Canadian culture? Does that make sense? In terms of, yes, we're having people from different parts of the world coming in, but from a Canadian's point of view, do you feel like they feel that it then dilutes their...
I mean, I guess I would ask, what is Canadian culture?
That's it.
Beyond the culture of our Indigenous people, Canadian culture is really the culmination, or the addition of all of the cultures that make up our country. And yes, we had two initial groups in terms of the English and the French, and they've played an important role historically. But over the last 100 years in particular, the success of this country has come from the hard work and the innovative spirit of people from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, from South America, and all of that has I think built what is Canadian culture. I mean, sure, we can argue that maple syrup and poutine are two, probably about the only two traditional foods, but on the other hand, I'll say pizza and Chinese food and samosas and are just as much Canadian now as anything else.
That's true. My last question to you is, what do you hope your legacy is when you leave as mayor of City of Kitchener and transition into something else?
Ooh, good question. Darren, I would say that as I said earlier on, I've always felt that it's important to lead with integrity, to be authentic, to never forget where you came from, and always remember that when you are done having the immense privilege of serving, and it is a privilege to be able to serve, particularly as long as I have, that you're going to be, you're going to go back to being an everyday citizen, right? And so, from my perspective, what's been important is making sure that, and I have a poster up in my office, and it's called The Essence of Success, and it's too bad I don't have it in front of me to read it, but basically the message in it is, that as I look back on my life, or in this instance, as I look back on my time in public service, I'll have hope that I've left my community, my country, and this planet in a better state than I found it, and that I've made a difference in the life of a young person, or ideally multiple young people. And that certainly has been a lot of what's driven me for the past 30 years, what continues to give me the energy and the passion. And as I see some of the systems that have provided our country and our planet stability over the last while, it's what drives me to still, be engaged, to be involved, and try to make a difference, because I want future generations to have the same opportunities, to have the same dreams and aspirations, or opportunities to see those dreams and aspirations come to fruition. And hopefully my time is, in the, I guess what some people would call the top job at the city on the political side, we'll do some of that.
Well, thank you very much, Mary Berry, for one, not only sharing your wisdom with us from your experience and your time, not just being a leader of the mayor as the mayor of City of Kitchener, but in your different walks of life, and how I can tell that everything that you do is purpose driven, but like you said, is leading with integrity. And the essence of success really is how you can impact someone else's life. I can tell you now that as our journey sort of has been for just a year, you've impacted my life in a very positive way, and I want to thank you for that. I know that there's so many people watching as well that have felt the work that you have done and how much it has impacted their lives, not just directly but indirectly too, and how it has gone on to sort of create this ripple effect in so many other lives, not just in Canada but across the world. So I want to thank you first for being the mayor that you are, but also being on our podcast today and sharing a bit of these insights and a bit of lessons and knowledge from your experience to us, a young generation, also trying to make a difference in the life and in this planet that we're living in. Thank you very much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me on, Darren, and thanks as well to you for the leadership you've provided in our community. I mean, you took a chance on this university and on this country, coming from Uganda, and you didn't just come here to sort of learn and take away what you can. You've really made an effort to make a difference here on this campus, in our community, and beyond. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know you and work together with you as well.
I appreciate that. And to our audience, thank you again for watching this episode. Thank you for continuing to be with us on this journey as we get to different guests that have experiences that have really shaped not just Canada, but the world, and in their different walks of life. I believe you've seen from Mayor Berry's journey today, from politics at a very young age to how now he's extrapolated that to create impact, not just nationally, but globally. We want to thank you. We want to thank you for watching, and we urge you to continue to share this, subscribe, and continue to like and push on this content as we continue to bring more episodes for you. See you in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day, week, or month. Thank you.